Yeah, there was a rough piece in there, but it was just slightly raised. Something I just burnished it down, rubbing my screwdriver along it. That's fine now. It's a bit of a mystery, that one. Not sure what was behind that. So I'll lubricate that again. And to assemble this, that spring goes on the central part. That little tab has to go into the notch. Now taking my crimp lug pliers, I lower that onto the top and then hold it snug. I can rotate this in my fingers to pull the spring into line. Then I can take my clutch, the outer part of the clutch, slide it over the top, and it just falls into position. Now the clutch always moves smoother in one direction than the other. That's exactly as designed. It only needs to move in one direction. So we'll do that. Put some synthetic grease in there, drop that into place, and that's engaged with the top of our take-up spool. The guide bush for the top of the film advance shaft. I need to apply some synthetic grease to the that little pinion on the top here. So I'll just apply a blob there, squeeze it in with my thumb, and hydraulic pressure will take that into the centre. Put a wipe through the middle, drop that in place, rotate the spool backwards and forwards until it falls into position. There. Screw at this side is the tall one with the shoulder on the top to support the shutter cocking rack. Just checking that that runs in smoothly as I watch that. This bush goes in plain side up, not countersunk side up. This little pawl goes in this way. This screw goes in. I'll give that a wipe of grease just at the top where the pawl's going to rotate around it, and run that in. Check that it moves freely. Do up my two screws, and there's a spring that acts on that pawl to push it towards the centre. So I'll see if I can get this seated. That's good. Now, when you're assembling this, if you press on the top of the film advance shaft, it'll push down past the release lever and just puts everything out of position. So normally I put that bush, that cover from the back of the back catch cover underneath to support that. So with this gear I just put some grease around the inside edge and around the centre, pop that into place. If you rotate that counterclockwise, it should push the pawl out of the way, and I usually just line it up front to back like that. This spring, I usually give that a wipe of grease, cup side up, that goes on. This drive dog, the washer, the gear fits over the square of the top of the shaft. and the screw holds that all together. You take care that the gear doesn't jump off the square at the top of the shaft while you're doing the screw up. I'm holding it down in place with my tweezers to prevent that. And the lock lever stops the advanced shaft from turning, so I was able to tighten that screw up. Okay, so far so good. Now at the base of the camera I need to put the catch in for our rewind button. We're in the picture, only just. What's that? Is it a bit of dirt or what? Yep, nothing of import. So this catch, I normally put a wipe of molybdenum paste around the tip of that where it contacts the film advance. Slide that in underneath. There's a return spring which is sometimes a bit tired and needs to be stretched back out. The screw that holds that is a shoulder screw. There are two shoulders on the screw, one for the spring, one for the lever. Check that it is free to move before you tighten that screw up. Check that it's still free to move. Now I want to get the tail of that spring over here. So lift it up with my tweezers and swing it behind this. That lever is now spring loaded. The take up spool, the sprocket, here's our sprocket. Slot side goes up. That goes into the back of the camera right here. The shaft, I'm going to lubricate towards the top with some synthetic grease, towards the bottom with some synthetic grease, and usually I give a wipe to that gear just for good measure. That goes in from the top. Line everything up, slide it through. Pull that lever back with my tweezers and that drops right into position. Now we've got to get our screw in here that couples the shaft and the sprocket together. So it's lining that up. Sometimes that'll start easier on one side of the shaft than the other, just because one side of the shaft might have more of a lead to it, more of a countersink. This one's going in without a murmur. So that's that. The rewind button. Put some grease through the spring. Put the button in place through the spring. Here's the washer that goes on that. I hold down the shaft from the top of the camera with my finger. We can get this started at the bottom. Doesn't want to start. What's going on? No, it looks good. Can't be holding my mouth right. Okay, it's going in. Open the back of the camera. Yeah, that's trapped on top of the lever, so the lever's not moving freely, or the washer, I can't tell which. The washer. the washer has to be able to go up around the shaft of that button, not get trapped under the end of it. That's better, it's in place now. Okay, tighten that up. I just hold my finger against that sprocket and do this up. If it hurts your finger, it's more than tight enough. That seems good. That back catch is a little bit tight, a bit rough in its action. I'm just going to put a touch of molybdenum paste on the catch there, I think. Just a bit stiff in the release. There might be a bit of corrosion on that back catch. So I can see a little dent in the door there, so it's possible that that door is not sitting quite. No, it seems to move freely enough now. Okay, so that's our film advance components basically in place. I'm just about to the stage where I can close up the bottom of the camera. Okay, I've got the chrome trim plate and things to go on here. So first thing I want to do is just lift up my lock lever and swing it to one side. Hold back my release lever, rotate this clockwise one full turn, drop my lock lever and so forth back into position to hold it. Put the base plate on and fit the screws. Got to be careful now not to hit the lock lever shaft, otherwise it'll release that and unwind the spring, and I'll have to do this all over again. So I'll get those three screws in position. Put my film advance lever in position. Fit the three screws. Right, now with the lever there it can't unwind, so I'm safe. I'll get my other screws in the base plate, and that was the position that was tight when I took the camera apart. That's not the screw that came out from there, because the screw head on that was slightly damaged, and I've used it over here. That went on without too much of an argument. And this will be the lucky last. Okay, so we've got our film advance pretty much complete here. So if I press the release lever, the release shaft there, hold my finger on the lock shaft, I can swing the film advance lever, it returns to the rest position. Everything's moving smoothly. The lock lever's job is to stop the film advance from being able to move if the frame counter has reached number 1. So when frame counter reaches number 1, this lever is allowed to lift up and locks the film advance. For all other numbers it's held down, and so it doesn't lock the film advance. So if you don't hold down the lock lever while you're moving this, nothing will go. Alright, so far so good. What's next? Time to put the cocking rack and so forth back into this camera, so I'll start by putting the chrome trim back on the top there. And I'll put the strap lug in at the end of the body here to hold that all in place. The strap lug's just held on with 2 screws. The holes in the strap lug are slightly slotted. I've found from experience that the correct place for the strap lug is pushed as far to the end of the camera top as possible, right up against the heads of those screws. Okay, so that's not going anywhere. I've got the cocking racks here. I'll just give that a wipe with some synthetic grease, particularly on the underside. Put that into place. And normally that would be set with 2 teeth engaged, just like that. The hold down bracket goes here. There's my holes there. Screw at the back and this post at the front. Well, I'll put the post in first. There was a shim washer under that bracket at the back when we started, which may or may not be needed. Won't know until we try it. It's not uncommon for things to have shims at one stage in their life, but when as stuff wears and clearances grow, there's no need for that shim anymore. Let's see if I can get this bracket squared up. Got that down tight. I'll check the action of the film advance to see if it moves smoothly. It does, so I don't need a shim under there. The strap lug goes here. And the screw at this position normally passes through the meter, but we'll just put it in place by itself for the moment. Check that those screws are tight and check the action of the film advance. That's nice and smooth, absolutely no hiccups there, that's just as it should be. The door needs to go on the front of the camera next, I think. So we'll just open that up. Put a wipe of synthetic grease in there and in there. Fit the door, swing it into place. Now there were shim washers on that door. I've got 2 washers here, one thick and one thin. I'll put the thicker one at the top, line up that screw hole and the washer, which is sometimes awkward. Pop the screw in. That went in okay. Flip this upside down and put the other washer at the base. Now this may or may not be enough to take up the clearance. Oh, it feels reasonably snug. I'll line up that hole. In fact, the hinge pin screw. It's not lining up. I've got to keep that under some tension. There's obviously a bit of spring in that door. Probably means that the arms are slightly bent perhaps. So I'll just check the action of that door, see if it opens and closes. Oh, that arm's not in place. Let's back this out. One of my two arms was not correctly in position. Let's recover my washers, since I don't want them getting lost. Start again. That looks better. Well, my thicker washer, as I look at it here, is actually two washers. So it was a stack of two washers. They were neatly glued together with grease. And the thinner washer here at the base. Doesn't want to start. Cannot get this one to start. I might have to try another screw. It may be that the thread's on the end of it burred over. No, it's running in nicely now. No arguments. Now will it open and close? That feels good. Okay. Well, at the base of the camera, now that we've got the cocking rack in place and the film advance lever, as a result that shouldn't be able to unwind itself, I'll put my leatherette on the base of the camera and we'll close this base up completely. Here's the leatherette from the base of the camera, and I'm just scraping those corrosion products and dried adhesive and so forth off that. This piece here is where our piece is missing. Now there's a little bit of rubbish on there I'd rather see the back of. But I've got to be very careful because obviously it's fragile around that spot. That looks fine. Now the leatherette is quite strange in its appearance. There's quite a marked line across here. The chrome trim doesn't fit neatly to the base of the camera. It's like that recess was not shallow enough, not deep enough. And that chrome trim sits slightly proud there, and that's what's left this line in here, I think. So I think we're stuck with that. It's quite an interesting pattern. So there's my leatherette. I may glue there's a tiny scrap, a tiny fragment missing here, and I may glue that in position before I put this down, I think, just for good measure. I'm going to put a bit of painter's tape over that hole there and see if I can glue that fragment back into position that's currently missing. Let's see if I can press this down into place. Well, that looks great from the bottom. Of course, I've got no idea how to look from the top. And I'll give that a wipe with some adhesive. I'll just push that in. I just want to get that to squeezing around the edges of that patch, so it'll glue that little patch back in place. That's probably all it'll take. Now I'm going to apply some glue to the whole thing and put it back on the camera. Hopefully after that I can peel off my masking tape and everything will stay where it's put. I've got rather too much adhesive on here. I've got to make sure I get everything covered and get rid of any excess. I think that'll do us. Bring this back into the picture. And put this in place. It's normal for leatherettes to shrink somewhat with age, so they often do not want to fit down neatly round a raised boss like this. So you may need to encourage them. Making sure it's pressed in firmly round here. that should be good. I'll lift that painter's tape off now. I think it's done its job. There's our little missing fragment back in place. I can see around the edges of that. I'm not sure whether you can, but you can just see the cracks around the edges. That will disappear with a little bit of polish. The main thing is it's back in place, so the hole's filled. The scarring will be minimal. Get our film advance lever back on. Check that the film advance moves smoothly. It still does, no problems there. So leatherette patch to go on here. Just get my adhesive evenly spread on this patch. That looks good. Now I'll see if I can align the grain a bit better than previously. The misaligned grain was what told me that had been taken off at some stage. It's very unusual the way that leatherette sits. There's obviously a problem with the way that camera body was machined, I would say. Alright, that looks quite good. But we better have the back catch cover and tripod surround back on here. So I'll take these, hold these two pieces together, feed one screw up in the longer slot, fit the spring into place. So the spring is pressing against the screw. And the moving arm. Now holding that carefully, get that onto the camera and settle it in position. You don't want that spring to get loose or get caught underneath anything. I'll get this screw down and check that the action's good. There's no problems there. If you suspect that the spring has moved while you were putting it on there, stop and do the job again. Otherwise you'll end up with a mutilated spring and it won't ever do the job. Right. So I've checked that, tightened both screws. That's the base of the camera dealt with. And at the top of the camera, we can go no further now until I've done the rangefinder, which certainly needs to be serviced.